being what I thought was gluten intolerance to being a wheat eater. And here's how the story begins. At the beginning of 2015, I came across some articles suggesting that gluten sensitivity was completely fake. And there are so many gluten-free eaters that are not celiac. I was surprised. I hadn't considered that eating gluten-free was something that was kind of fake, kind of in your head. And I also recognize that the gluten-free eaters confuse the actual gluten allergy disease and make it sound like a lifestyle choice or a fad and not a real allergy. And I had been becoming aware of that over the last few years. There's a lot of people who think that if you can't eat, that you say you are a gluten intolerant eater and you don't eat gluten, that it's the same thing as a celiac, and it's completely not. Celiac is a very serious thing where people have real serious allergies to it, as opposed to people like myself who are choosing not to eat it. So I read a 2015 study that was done on people who claimed that gluten sensitivity and people who actually reported more stomach issues with the placebo diet than the people who were on a diet with gluten. So that made me kind of question my own gluten intolerance. And really for a few years I'd been wondering if I really needed to avoid gluten, and it was becoming a burden because I've been eating vegan now and trying to avoid animal products and gluten, and eating out, eating with friends and stuff, even just cooking for ourselves here is a bit more difficult. So it's easier for sure if you can eat wheat. So this is my personal anecdotal story of how I thought that I was gluten intolerant for 6 years. And I started eating whole food, plant-based diet and found that I wasn't gluten intolerant. So this is just my little piece. It's not to say that this is true for everybody. Take it with a grain of salt. And I also need to say that if I would have heard someone say this to me a year ago, that being gluten intolerant was a lifestyle choice, I would have laughed at the idea. I really did think it was something that bothered me. That I would have laughed at the idea that someone could be intolerant and then suddenly find out they were not intolerant to gluten. I believe so strongly that I was gluten intolerant and that had become part of my food identity. I have been severely lactose intolerant since I was 16 years old. A perceived mild intolerance to wheat developed when I was about 20 years old. And at the time, my dairy intolerance is definitive. I would get extremely sick if I ingest dairy. I get debilitating cramps, pain, bloating, the feeling that I'm going to vomit. Like, it feels worse than food poisoning. It is really horrible. The wheat intolerance was self-diagnosed and it wasn't severe. I felt bloated. I didn't know why. I had heard that people who are lactose intolerant can often be gluten intolerant. 6 years ago, I'd read something about that. So I tried it. I felt better. And looking back, I realized that it wasn't a very scientific way of targeting and eliminating what was bothering me in my diet. I was a heavy meat eater at the time, packing in the protein, hitting the gym often, and my digestion would sometimes cause me pain and I would become bloated. And especially after eating starchy meals, I noticed. So as a vegan today, I have learned that by eating high fiber with lots of fruits and veggies and keeping slow digesting animal flesh out of my guts, my digestion is almost impeccable. On average, I have a bowel movement every day, sometimes twice. And when I ate animal products, I could go like 3 days. I know it's horrible. I could go 3 days without moving my bowels, despite drinking like tons of water. I was always drinking water. So it wasn't dehydration. That was not the problem. My best guess is that by slowing down my digestion process with animal flesh at that time, my gut was able to ferment fructose or starch, like when I would eat anything that was like a bread. And that got trapped more easily, and that caused a small correlation that I drew to gluten. So cutting it out worked because it required that I give up much of the processed foods that are high in added sugars and starch. I was eating more cleanly because I was only eating things that I made in my kitchen. So it may have had an inadvertent positive effect on my digestion, but I pinned it on gluten, and for 6 years, that's what I did. I avoided it. So another angle to research, if this interests you, is food map and fermentation in the gut due to eating animals that stay in the gut longer. My bowel movements were every 2-3 days, like I said, so before eating vegan, and now at least once a day, sometimes twice. So it is more healthy to move your bowels more often, and I think that a diet that helps you to do that is definitely something worth looking into for not only all of your digestive health, but for prevention of colon cancer. So to add to this, after 6 years eating gluten-free and 14 years eating dairy-free, I started eating the whole foods plant-based lifestyle. Eating plant foods mostly raw for 6 months led me to resources such as a BBC Catalyst show called The Gut Reaction. It's a documentary made in Australia, I believe. And it made me wonder whether eating such a clean plant-based diet had strengthened my gut flora so that trying gluten in my diet wouldn't lead to bloating. So whether or not that's true, I do not know. It is just another theory, but I'll put a link down below so that you can watch that video as well. And then I also was really, really intrigued after watching Dr. Michael Greger's video, which I'll also link to below. And it made me question whether I knew if I was truly gluten intolerant based on the research and the conclusions of how incredibly rare it is for someone to be gluten intolerant but not celiac. It is possible, but the diagnosis level on that is really, really low. So the likelihood of me being one of those people was pretty improbable. And his presentation also convinced me that including grains like wheat, barley, and rye in a plant-based diet was beneficial to gut health when you compare that to the gluten-free alternatives like rice flour and some of these other ones that have less of the fiber in it and more the accessible sugars and starches that take a shorter amount of time to digest. So how I went about doing this was I didn't want to try the store-bought breads. I knew that there was a lot more variables in those, and I didn't want to have any added preservatives or anything throwing off the let's test the gluten theory that I have. So I made homemade bread. I made sourdough, and what I did is I just took a quarter-sized piece. And the first day, that's all I ate was just this little quarter-sized piece. The next day I had 2 of the same size, and the next day I had 3. And by that time I was starting to feel a little bit more confident, so I had like half a slice the next day, and then the next day after that I had a whole slice. And I never had any indigestion and never had any problems with it. And today, now I'm eating, whole wheat pasta here and there. I'm eating bread that I make at home. I've tried the store-bought breads, and I don't have a problem with them, especially if they're on the fresher baked side, not the breads that sit on the shelf forever and ever and ever, like Wonder Bread or anything like that. It's more the stuff that they might make in the bakery at the grocery store. I'm fine with that. So I really strongly recommend, if you are gluten intolerant and it's something by choice, look at the research, give it a try, and just consider that there's a lot more food possibilities out there, and it may have been something else that triggered your discomfort, and you may have pinned it on the wrong thing. So give it a try. If you like this video, subscribe and share with your friends.